And joining us now at the Bloomberg Google Hangout at the U.S. Africa Business Forum is President Don Kaberuka of the African Development Bank, and remotely from an undisclosed location in New England, Ambassador John Simon, the former ambassador to the African Union. Mr. Kaberuka, let me start with you. There's a lot of talk today and at this summit, and I think in general, about investment in Africa. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you hope to see in terms of American investment in Africa, what metrics you look for heading into the future?
Thank you so much. Thank you. You know, for some time, the larger part of the investment flows had been into the extractive industry, is oil, gas, and mining. But since about 2007, we're seeing more investment in infrastructure, in services, reflecting the demographic dynamics of the continent. So I think opportunities are abound now. What we are doing is to work together with many friends to improve the business confidence, to reduce the risks for those who perceive them to be very high, even when some that are not as high, but also to bolster investment confidence, both for African investors and American business people.
Ambassador Simon, what do you find are the biggest misperceptions in terms of, Mr. Kaberuka was just talking about risks and perceived risks. What are the biggest misperceptions you think investors outside the continent of Africa have about African countries?
Well, for many American investors, they don't realize the really incredible growth that's occurred in Africa and in the many economies of Africa over the last 10 to 12 years. I mean, if you look at something like foreign direct investment, in 2002, I think it was about $7 billion. Now foreign direct investment in Africa is over $100 billion. If you look at the investment climate in countries throughout the continent, the top third of African countries now are among the fastest growing countries in the world and have pursued more orthodox and more sound investment policies than many of the countries in emerging and developing markets. I mean, it's a continent that has really taken to a business-first, investment-friendly approach.
Mr. Kaberuka, do you worry that the environment for development money from governments, particularly from the United States government, might be falling off at a time when we were having this encouragement of investment? A lot of our foreign policy here, a lot of the sort of public opinion makes it hard to make investments sometimes. Yet the USAID. 9 of the top 20 countries that it gives to are in Africa. So I wonder, do you worry about a fall off in development money when there's a potential increase in investment?
You know, as Ambassador says, we're at a time of narrative change. Because for a long time, the relationship between Africa and her partners was along the lines you mentioned, public money through agencies of development. Now, that is still needed for some things for some countries. But now we're talking about shifting the gear to making Africa a land of opportunity, which it is already, to ensure that we use public money as a leverage for private capital. So we understand that since the financial crisis, with the fiscal consolidation, with budget cuts, public money is limited. But even if it was increasing, the needs in Africa are so big. Infrastructure alone, you're talking about $90 billion a year. And we're looking for ways of using public money for leveraging private capital. And the leverage sometimes is in the neighborhood of 1 to 6. Every dollar of public money brings in $6 of private capital. So that is the way to go. And I think the summit goes in the right direction. It is not about African countries coming here to look for more public money. It is look for a smart way of working together between Africa's own resources, public money, U.S. institutions like Exim Bank, OPIC, USAID, and American business to increase financial flows in the continent.
Ambassador Simon, obviously not here with us at the summit right now. I wonder what questions you would be asking if you were here of your friends from Africa and your friends from the United States about what's going to come out of this summit. And I'd even encourage you to maybe ask Mr. Kaberuka a question.
Well, it's wonderful to be on this hangout with President Kaberuka. He's been a real force for some of the most important changes in the last decade in Africa in terms of making Africa more amenable to investment. I guess the most important question that I have, and it comes from my time at the African Union, where you're constantly reminded that Africa is, of course, not one country, it is 54, but it has to be one economy if it's going to realize its potential. Africa competes against China, it competes against India. These are large single markets, yet Africa can often be divided into smaller markets where goods have a tough time crossing borders, either because of lack of infrastructure or because of rules or regulations at the border that stop goods from getting across. I mean, I would like to ask President Kaberuka, where he sees the opportunity to break down those barriers and really present to the world one market for both trade and investment.
Ambassador, that is a very pertinent and powerful point you're making. We have 54 countries, and the agenda for the single market is the most important agenda for the coming years. Now, you are right. There are some physical barriers you have to overcome around infrastructure, around power pools, but there are some soft infrastructure issues around red tape, bureaucracy, visas, free movement of people. And I do think that we need to up our act on this one to turn declarations into actions. You recall that often when you read reports about Africa, you hear people talking about intra-African trade being only 12%. In fact, if you look at parts of Africa where the things you are mentioning have happened, like the Eastern African region, in fact, trade in the region is around 26%, which would be equal to what is happening in Southeast Asia. But because of very slow progress in Central Africa, in North Africa, the average comes down 12%. So we have a lot to do, and the African Development Bank spends about 20% of all its money at the moment to try to do the kind of things you describe. But I look forward to leaders making further commitments to turn declarations into actions to make the single market a reality in the next decade. And
Mr. Kaberuka, I wonder, what are the challenges to that in terms of bringing African countries together, 54 countries, to see a common interest as a single market, or at least more of a common market, as opposed to being competitors?
Look, just imagine if the states of the United States of America, each one of them had its own currency, investment laws, taxation laws, you had visas. It would be very complicated. Now, there is a history behind it in Africa, which you have to overcome, but there is political commitment to get things done. I do believe that what the ambassador is saying is, you have made commitments to a single market. Now, go ahead and actually do it. What I'm saying to you is that in some parts of Africa, a lot of progress has been made. Where progress is much slower, often there are some political issues, there are some diplomatic issues, but on balance, I do think that we have made much progress than we have made in the past. Where I would like to see faster movement now is about free movement of people on the African continent. It should be about arrangements of the types they have in Europe on the Schengen agreements. It will be cooperation of financial services. It will be being able to list companies across the borders. It will be about deregulation of aviation. But now in Africa, traveling within Africa by air, we pay 40% more than we could pay if there was deregulation. Now there is a commitment to deregulation, it should happen. Sometimes we have issues with, is there a bridge, is there a highway? But even those physical barriers alone, when they are removed, sometimes we still have challenges because of political commitment. But I think leaders are now committed. They understand that we are paying a high price for not allowing these markets to function.
President Kaberuka of the African Development Bank, thank you so much for joining us. Ambassador Simon, former ambassador to the African Union, thank you so much for hanging out with us remotely. Really appreciate that. We will be back live from the U.S.-Africa Business Forum at the Bloomberg Google Hangout here in the center of the Mandarin Oriental Hotel shortly. So come back and watch our next interviews. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Ambassador.